Welcome to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to people like you. Today on the program, we got to talk to Tom Lung from Nerds for Humanity. We had a great conversation talking about the origins of his channel and why he championed the nerd cause from the start of the Yang campaign, as well as what's it going to take to have a more human-focused economy, talking the metrics of how we evaluate our progress as society. And then we talk about how we incentivize the politicians to address those concerns seriously. And then we had some fun not taking it all seriously. We wanted to talk about, what are the key questions that you all wanted to know to define his nerdiness. So we had a lot of fun at the end in our second part, talking about those aspects as well as the infrastructure we're going to need to be building after 2020. So it was a great time getting to talk to Tom. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I know you will too. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, we are here with Tom Lung. He is from Nerds from Humanity. You might have seen me on his program as of last week. By the time this is recorded, it might be a little bit more than that. But Tom, it's great to have you back on the program. It's been so long since you've been here at the Hill of Roses.
Good afternoon, Rosebuds. It's always a pleasure to be on your show, John. I still have fond memories of the first time, and hopefully we'll continue many conversations in the future, but for sure the next 16 days is going to be wild and crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the first thing I wanted to talk about with you, because we didn't get to talk about this during the debate that I had you on, or the first time when we were talking about top priorities, is kind of like the background for how Nerds for Humanity came to be, Nerds for Yang originally. What made you identify and want to build a movement around the nerd? How do you define nerdiness, and why did you want to champion that kind of movement?
Well, the channel started out, interestingly enough, a couple weeks before I first discovered Yang through the Rogan podcast. I was having a long conversation with a friend about the state of the country and how we got to where we are with Trump being in the White House. And one of the themes of our conversation was that for too long, in my opinion, the Democratic Party has kind of given the same prescription since basically the first Clinton administration. And, it was always like, okay, cheaper college, middle-class tax breaks, that kind of thing. And, one of the hypotheses was like, well, a lot of these voters for Trump, they basically know that that's kind of like maybe necessary, but definitely not sufficient. And they're fed up, and they wanted something completely different. So they know. And I think the other thing that came to mind was how, if you look at economic trends, that group is going to get more and more left behind. And, you just see more and more wealth going to a smaller pocket of the population. So if I were in their shoes, like, why wouldn't I take a chance on this kind of brash, maverick businessman, right? And one of the things that we talked about was how more people going to college may not solve these problems. They're not suddenly going to become an AI engineer for Facebook. Like that's a hard job to get. And, and if you get it, those guys they name their price, but not everyone's on track for that. And we're not in sort of post World War II era where everybody gets like a great middle-class job, even without a college degree. And those days are over. And so it was a week later that I heard the Rogan podcast. I heard Yang talk about it. I thought, oh, this is great. This is exactly what we were talking about. He must be some kind of book author. And then later in the interview, I guess it came up that he was running for president. I was like, no way, So I mean,
you're right, though. He was an author as well, but yeah,
true.
He was so much more.
True. So then I was like, what? And then, of course, I have to be upfront, like seeing an Asian American on the forefront on a public policy issue was refreshing to me. And as like a second generation American with now third generation Asian American kids, like that was important to me to see some representation. So I decided as a political junkie to start, the Nerds for Yang YouTube channel. And for several months, it like each video may have gotten like 20 or 30 views, and then it started to get more traction, and we've kept it up since. Now, as for the Nerds thing, that was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, like sort of like this. It was a bit of a response to Trump, because Trump is the anti-nerd. He's not about
kind of that classic bully. Yeah, I can kind of see what you're going for here.
Right?
Yeah,
he is. He's this kind of a dick, and so like I mean, he literally or apparently paid people to take his SATs for him. And I remember people when I was in high school offering me to do take problem sets and homework for them.
Dude reminds us all of Biff from back.
That's right.
We got ourselves our Marty McFly, the nerd, or what was his? George McFly. That's his dad. Yeah, we got that classic nerd bully dynamic. And if you see the second one, it basically seems like it is Trump that they're trying to emulate in that movie.
Seriously. So the whole Nerds for Yang thing was like, hey, why don't we celebrate people who try and think through a problem and all of its complexity and really have a respect for precision of thinking and consistency and logic and aligning things with reality and looking at data to make hard decisions, because like we would do that in any normal business. Like, why shouldn't we do that for our government? So that's how the Nerds for Yang channel started. And then of course we had to rebrand after Andrew suspended. But I've been having a blast. It's always fun talking about politics. I love policy and politics, so it's not.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. We love those dynamics here as well. We're definitely nerds ourselves as well. But I think you alluded to the best point. You kind of were following the data on why Trump was able to be victorious, and you were trying to have it be this reflection off of kind of Trump. And this connected with the Yang campaign, because I would say Andrew would even call himself a nerd, right? Oh, yeah. He's definitely a data-focused individual. And I think one of the things I'd love to hear from you is, when we follow the data, what are the metrics we are trying to achieve better scores in? One of the things like Yang championed in his campaign was this idea of an American scorecard. And I'd love to hear, in your opinion, what do you think are some of those metrics that we do need to be focusing in on and saying these are valuable metrics compared to some metrics that are used today that you might not find as valuable?
Yeah. I'll start with what I don't think is super valuable. I think like the NASDAQ and Dow are useful metrics, but they don't really reflect the prospects of the everyday man. Of course, you don't want a crashing stock market, but just because the market's doing really well, it just means that the companies have a good prospects relative to what they used to have. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are going to hire more people or pay their people more money. In many ways, the motivations for capital is that it wants to go to the most efficient organizations, which generally have lower labor costs, right? So I think the president likes to talk about NASDAQ and Dow because I think in the 80s, that was like kind of like everybody always assumed that, well, when a company's doing better, they're going to hire more people and everybody's going to benefit. But I think that's becoming less and less true. In terms of what I would recommend, I do agree with a lot of what Yang was talking about. If I had to name 3 or 4 metrics, one would be asking parents, do you feel like your kids have a brighter future or more opportunity than you do? That's a harder metric. It's obviously like a qualitative, it's a kind of like optimism metric. But if that's a metric is going in the wrong direction, fundamentally something's not working. On top of that, I would certainly look at not just median income, but probably the bottom 10 percentile income, because you could have a situation where the median is doing fine, but that sort of bottom 10% or bottom quintile is doing worse. And I'm not just trying to be a bleeding heart liberal here, but at some point, like for society to be stable, there's only so much that bottom quintile is going to put up with before they say, burn this whole system down. Like this is all BS. And they start, kind of just saying like the whole thing is broken.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if you're wealthy and you are fortunate, like you actually have an interest in making sure that everybody's doing well enough that they're not gonna burn the stadium down. Like you can run up the points as much as you want, but if the other team starts to like clear the bench and attack you, like that's not in no one's interests. So bottom 10% income, median income, life expectancy, probably like you could talk about cleanliness of air and water, but I think that will actually show up in some of the health life expectancy stuff. Those would be some, so if I had to maybe give three, it would be, do you feel like your kids have as many or more opportunities than you did? Are the bottom 10% medium and median income, are they going up? And then maybe something around health, like infant mortality, again, for the bottom 10%. Like there's no question that if you have resources, you can get the best healthcare. I mean, look at President Trump. He recovered great from COVID. He also had like literally a team of doctors around the clock.
Yeah, I don't think everyone gets a helicopter to take them to a hospital. No. Yeah, so he had top tier quality care. I think,
and he got Regeneron. Nobody else has access to that. He got remdesivir. That's a $5,000 treatment
cocktail.
Yeah, so. I think in general, the scorecard needs to look at how the whole team is doing and how, frankly, the least fortunate are doing. And otherwise, you could end up in a world where that separation becomes unsustainable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a strong point. So I think that turns to the second point, which is, obviously, we now kind of understand the data metrics that we're using to evaluate how good of a job we're trying to progress as society. What do you think is going to be required incentive-wise to achieve improvement in those key metrics? Because I think right now, at least it seems like Andrew Yang has started to say, okay, we have a democracy right now that is not representing the needs of the people and this human factor. They're using these traditional metrics. What do you think is going to be needed to incentivize these politicians to kind of see the data more than the politics? Because I think people right now are on these partisan lines of just pure politics compared to saying, what's the best solution to the present problem? What do you think is going to be needed incentive-wise to start changing these dynamics at all?
That is that's the thing that keeps me up a lot at night, because these metrics have been around. They're not like secrets. Like we've known income inequality has been an issue. We know for a fact that health is declining. And so the question is like, why aren't politicians and voters paying attention? And I think the fundamental root cause there is that voters and Americans, like we haven't been trained to be data driven. So I'll give you an example. If I'm in a debate with a MAGA person about Trump versus Biden, they will bring up all kinds of stuff like, oh, did you know that Hunter said this in some text message? Or did you know that what happened to Hillary's emails? But rarely will they show me data. Even when they talk about, record low unemployment, and then I show them the chart, that says, well, actually unemployment had been going down since 2009 when there was a different guy in the White House. And that's just like that. It's not part of the dialogue. It's not, it's sort of like two people arguing over football, but not looking at the stats and just saying like, oh, well, the Patriots always deflated the ball or whatever.
Yeah, it's
but
anecdotal to its core of how people argue. Because I think even Yang has himself admitted to this. People connect more with this storytelling element because it's easier for us in our minds to imagine a scenario. It's very illustrative in terms of, we can actually visually see it. When you just give someone a statistic, you're saying, okay, this might be a problem, but we're making you do all the work to do the imagining of how does that situation come to exist. And I think that's certainly a very important element of kind of leadership is how do we communicate these values? In terms of your mind, we've obviously talked on many occasions about the importance of competency in leadership. Could you basically reiterate for some of the folks out there what you think are some of the key attributes of leadership, of why you think Trump has been such a poor leader in mismanaging this crisis right now?
Yeah. There's a few things that I would look for that I feel like I haven't seen in the Trump administration. I think the first is the ability to break down complex problems and identify root causes and then develop plans and strategies that are measurable, that address those root causes. And, anybody listening to this that works in a normal company, like this is very common. This is what managers do.
Yeah.
But yet we have a president, take the COVID thing, for example. Like he keeps talking about banning flights from China in January. The reality was that the virus was already in the country by January. Some people think like November, December, not to mention there were flights coming in from Europe. And then the fact that American citizens traveling from China were allowed to come in and there was no additional testing required of them. Like that requires understanding the root cause of the problem, which is, oh, shoot, we have a virus in our country. It is now spreading. The goal should be to reduce that spread and to make sure there's sufficient treatment capacity. So blocking flights from China might be necessary, but isn't sufficient. And we just don't have a leader in the White House who I think is able to have, honestly, boring 5-point plans that are measurable, that have milestones, that require complex execution and alignment of activities. So that's number one. It's like in my opinion, you want a leader that can get to the root of a problem and then execute on a plan to address it. The second thing is in my opinion, you want a leader that can attract and retain talent, like very capable people. Now, I may not have agreed with them, but I did think that like Gary Cohn, Kelly, McMaster, these are very accomplished people. They're all gone. I mean, they all, I know Trump says that he fired them.
Getting books.
Right? Yeah. And I know Trump says they're all losers and he fired them and they didn't leave him, but whatever, they're not there anymore. And the people that he has still around him, like if you exclude next of kin, these are not the best and brightest in the country. And then if you include next of kin, they're definitely probably, they're just definitely not up to the task. So team would be the second one. And then I think the third thing is overlooked, which is trust. Like if we can't look over his shoulder and if we're not in the room where they're making these big decisions, then we need to trust that this guy's going to do the right thing. And he's going to put, I used to be a Republican. We used to talk about country first. You would want a leader that would put the interests of the country in advance of your family's interests or your personal interests or your pride. So on all three counts, I would score Donald Trump like an F. Now some people out there are going to say, "Oh, about Biden, he's no, racehorse." He may not be like a straight A on all three of those things, but if you talk about like, does he have plans that address a problem? If I look at the Joe Biden website and I look at the climate plan, the health plan, the tax plan, I may not agree with everything there, but there's a plan.
Yeah.
You go to the Donald Trump website and see if you can find a plan. There's none. Because I don't think he has the ability to focus, and he doesn't care.
There's certainly slogans, but there's certainly plans. Like when you look at the level of detail of Joe Biden's plans, I largely agree with a lot of his common goals. I don't think he goes far enough on certain things. But yeah, he has certainly a plan that tries to address the root issue. There are a couple issues where I obviously disagree with him still, but I think people, underestimate his policy competency. It might not be him himself, but as he said, it's an administration, it's managing a plan. And if policy wonks are putting that on his website, well, that's what he's going to be probably pushing for at the end of the day. So I think people don't give him enough credit. And I think the last question I want to ask you in this part before we get to some fan questions in our second part and really test the nerdiness of the movement that you're building here. The last question is like movement management. There's certainly been a lot of talk back and forth on, how do we move the ball on these key issues of democracy reform, of, having an economic alignment, of, direct payments to people and getting these correct measurements in. And they see Biden as someone who is likely going to have, a successor in Kamala Harris in 2024. What do you see as that path? Like if you were trying to sell the Yang Gang on a project plan of how do we grow this movement, what are some of those key milestones that you want us to aim at and focus
at? So the first would be, let's make sure we have a White House that at least is going to be open to new innovative ideas. And obviously, I don't think that Trump would fit that bill. The second thing would be, once we get Biden into the White House, would be getting Yang in a senior role in the cabinet, or at least getting him an offer. And then he can decide if he wants to take it. And then I think the third thing would be pushing hard on congressional candidates in winnable districts, or pushing hard on state propositions around RCV or maybe some UBI pilots. I think all three of those things are totally achievable, but they're also not overnight wins. And this is going to be potentially our life's work, like this stuff like that we want. If you read Yang's proposals, like that's a lot of stuff that he wanted to do that we all agreed with. And so I do think we need to kind of brace ourselves for a marathon. And I think I've noticed that there are some folks who are really bummed. Of course I was too when he suspended, but the fact that he got on CNN and raised his profile, and the fact that he's now campaigning for Biden and is basically a surrogate, and maybe he gets offered a senior cabinet role, that's huge. That is huge, because I do believe Biden likes Yang, and I believe he respects him, and I believe that Yang can be very persuasive. So if you imagine like Yang in the Oval with Biden and sort of the inner circle, how would that not be a good thing relative to Trump hanging out with Jared and Ivanka and Barr and McEnany and that whole like pack of hyenas?
Yeah, I think fundamentally it comes down to just, do you want to go in the correct direction, but not far enough, and maybe not in the right, solution that you want, but it's trying to address the same problems? Or do you want to go in the opposite direction and just have these things go to these special interest groups? Now, I'm not going to deny Joe Biden's going to be someone we're going to have to move. As you said, he's not perfect yet, but he's shown to be, in my opinion, a very adaptable politician over time. He has constantly tried to follow where, the movement is. And we've been, in my opinion, doing great work on the local levels, pushing for UBI. We've had so many pilot programs, and I think that's really a good measure of we have a lot of work to do, but we're at the start of a successful movement. So, Tom, I think this is a great point for us to take a break and come back and have a little fun with some nerdy questions to get to know you a little bit more. Because I've always loved when you do the Ask Me Anything. So I collected a lot of nerdy Ask Me Anythings for you. So everyone stick tuned. We'll be back with Tom to answer some of your questions. Okay, we're back here at the Hill of Roses with Tom Long from Nerds for Humanity. We wrapped up our first part of talking about, what does it truly mean to be a nerd, have a competent administration, and really build up the Yang Gang movement. And now it's time for us to talk a little bit of Tom's nerd credentials. We asked some of our fans out there some questions of, what are some nerdy answers that you might want from Tom here? The first comes from one of our own contributors, Dennis. He asked, Tom, what's your favorite gaming system?
I should acknowledge up front that I'm probably more of a policy nerd, a business nerd, and a academic nerd than the more cool type nerds. But I will tell you, my favorite gaming system was the Xbox. And the reason was I happened to get one and have one when Xbox Live came out for the first time. And I was in graduate school. And I happened to have, so I was on campus and I had this amazing internet connection. And I was able to host like tons of people on my server for Halo. And actually, no, it was Ghost Recon. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And people would be like, oh my God. And my handle at that time was Evil Empire. And they're like, oh, Evil Empire, your server's amazing. And so I would play all the time. And that was my second year of grad school, my final year. So I wasn't like going for straight A's. So I had a little bit of time to do some gaming at night. And I still look fondly of my Ghost Recon days on Xbox Live as a sniper, hanging out and enjoying myself. Yeah.
See, I certainly can relate to that. My favorite game, I'd say for the majority of my like middle school and high school experience was Halo 3. Oh my God. So many game days where we would either play custom game modes or just online. So many great memories there. So I also can relate. I'm an Xbox person myself. So let's go to our next fan question. So this is another great nerdy topic. I'm certainly a fan of this myself. Kale asks, Tom, have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons beforehand?
It's so funny. I haven't. And a lot of friends in college were shocked because they were like, oh my God, you would have loved Dungeons and Dragons. Because I do like, I do have like a pretty good imagination and I can think kind of, creatively. But unfortunately, when I was growing up, for some reason, no one else was into D&D. And so I tried to get my kids into it. And I started like playing like kind of very basic versions of it with them. And they didn't really get into it as much as I did. I like setting up the scene for them and then telling them what would happen next. And then, they rolled or whatever. But I'm not a hardcore D&D guy. I do feel like if I were given the opportunity, I could be pretty good at it and would enjoy it quite a bit.
Yeah, I feel like I can relate to that a lot. I played a lot growing up, middle school through even college. But you're absolutely right. It's very dependent on having people around you that are also players. Certainly a fun campaign out there. So I'd love to ask, in these medieval senses, have you seen like Lord of the Rings in that style?
Mm-hmm.
Like what class do you think you would be playing in a Dungeons and Dragons if, you were to play a campaign?
Dude, I don't even know what
are you a spellcaster? Are you a fighter here, Tom? Are you the support? What's your role, man?
If there were, so I don't know enough about the levels and cast, but let me kind of imagine and speculate. If there were roles where I had very special skills,
Mm.
and I'm not necessarily at the front of the pack, but I can either like help the team see around the corner or be aware of concerns before they happen. Or if we're in battle and there's a very unique capability, then I would like to be that guy, the guy that develops like a mastery of a specific, very exotic skill. That would be my game. Yeah.
See, it's funny because you actually have an exact role for that. So whenever you find your chance at D&D, you are a rogue, my friend here. This is your class. This is your destiny. But
Okay.
I think this is a great question. Thank you, Kale, for being able to ask. Let's go to another question that we got from the audience. This came from Zach Sacher. He asked, do you think alternate realities exist?
It's interesting. I mean, you could argue they actually already do in the current reality, where we live in a country where half of the country interprets the world we have today completely different than the other one. So there's literally alternate realities within the basic level 1 reality. Then there are other ones beyond that. I mean, I don't know. It's possible, but I am a man of science, so I would need to see evidence for it.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think it's impossible, but some things I just don't question. It's like, I can't answer that, so why bother contemplating it at times? But I think it's interesting to think, like, could there be a better universe? Are we on that path already? Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I used to think like, oh, I wouldn't want to be in any other reality. Like, we live in such an amazing world. But right now I feel like, golly, if there were
an alternate reality that has like no scarcity, that sounds like a great reality, like if that's out there. But yeah, I think I would tend to say no. I think that's just my leanings, but I don't know. There's a lot to be contemplated there. Let's go to one more question here before we go to the most requested question by far. So this next question comes from Patrick. He asks, Tom, do you have any thoughts on what programming languages people should know? Do you do any programming yourself?
So I work in the daytime at a tech company as a product manager. So I work very often with our engineers, but I don't code myself. What I have found is that I've been in tech long enough, like originally started in 99. So I've been in this industry long enough to know that any language that's hot today probably won't be hot by the time, if you're in high school or something, by the time you get out of college, like it'll be something else. So I would encourage people to learn the fundamentals that are kind of independent of one language or another, and focus on also like just problem solving, creative thinking, and collaboration. And some of the basics, like basic math and things like that, I think are more important than being the master of like the hot framework of the month kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a big kind of the equivalent of like the liberal arts approach, like get really good at learning and picking up new languages, but don't bet your career and future on one versus another.
I think that makes a lot of sense. You got to have a little bit of a flexible foundation, because you never know what employer is going to pick you up if they're using a different coding language than another one. You're kind of a little job dependent in that regard as well. So now, Tom, we got our final question for you on the nerd scale. This is highly requested, the number one question by far. So we have to ask you, Tom, what are your favorite nerdy movies? What's your top 3 nerdy movie choice?
Okay. A few come to mind. So one's a negative one.
Okay.
Which is Revenge of the Nerds, which does not portray nerds in a very positive way. But in a weird way, I like it because I'm like, yeah, that's the thing. That's the script we're looking to flip. That's where we want to say, hey, a lot of those nerds. I was actually talking to my son about this. He was asking me like, oh, Dad, were you cool?
That's always a hard one.
Yeah, and I was like, hell no.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Oh, well, did you feel bad about that?" I was like, "Well, you know what? Like now I'm able to give you guys a really kind of privileged life because of my luck, but also like my nerdy capabilities. And secondly, like I do feel like the work I do in the day, but also even on the weekends with the Nerds Channel, I feel like I'm having impact on the world. Like we're building the of the people thing as well. So, and if I think about the people who were cool in high school and even in college, like some of them are not having as much impact. And so, you know, in the long run, you want to do stuff that's true to who you are. And I'm a guy that likes to learn things, and I love to really kind of try and master things and get into the nuance and complexity of stuff. And I like to build and have impact. And if that means that I'm a nerd, then that's fine. So Revenge of the Nerds was one.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is actually I was just watching this recently again, Moneyball.
Yes, great movie.
Which, you know, is sort of like the power of you know, the most kind of basic statistics and math being applied to one of the most kind of manly, you know, sports, right? So that's super cool. And then the third one, like, I don't know if it's now it's so mainstream, but you know, any of the Star Wars stuff, but particularly I love lately Mandalorian. That whole series is just freaking awesome.
Yeah,
and yeah,
justified Disney Plus on its own.
I know this is the way.
It totally is. And, you know, I love that you put Moneyball in there because I think it would be great, like, if we could try and Moneyball these individual races. I'm sure a lot of these billionaires who are donating across the country, they have people who are doing that Moneyballing for them. Do you think that's a worthy exercise to plan for 2022? I think
Yes.
the last question I want to ask you is, like, what type of infrastructure do you think we should be building up post 2020? Everyone's so glued in on how they support these candidates in this election cycle. What do you think is the first thing we got to be figuring out, like, after this election? Do you think it matters if it's Trump versus Biden of what type of infrastructure we build?
You know, this is a video that I wanted to put together and never got around to it for this cycle, but maybe I'll do it for the 2022 cycle, which is a scorecard of all of the Yang Gang for Congress candidates, and not necessarily only evaluating them on sort of their resources and maybe like their background and experience, but also like the district that they're in and the trends of the voters in those districts, and like what how high of a hill they need to climb and how much, you know, headwind there's going to be. I for sure think that getting more deliberate about focusing our resources of the movement on the highest kind of expected value races makes a ton of sense. The other thing about infrastructure is, like, one of my side projects is this thing called ofthepeople.us, and it's basically a platform to kind of like a Kickstarter for Congress to help first-time candidates test the waters and evaluate if their candidacy might resonate with people before they kind of pull the trigger and do a full FEC run. So I think we have a ton of work to do around infrastructure. I think the other thing is like state propositions around ranked choice voting.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something that will piss off some people, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Ready. I'm buckled up.
You ready for this shit? For all of you guys who put so much energy into Unity 2020, we could have had a state probably pass ranked choice voting as a proposition. There was so much energy there.
Yeah.
And you think about the outcome, it's like, well, really, like, we really were going to get Yang and McRaven on a freaking ballot in like a few months. Like, that was just not a probable outcome.
Guys, we were using the same philosophy as Kanye West. Like, we got to reevaluate our feasibility. Like, you know, Yang himself, long shot. We all acknowledge this. But, like, a shot, technically possible compared to these things. And I agree. It was a waste of time. I would have even been happy with them, as I think we've talked about beforehand, if it was just Unity 2024. Like, start talking about it now, but plan for a future cycle. That would have been fine with me too. But Tom, I think this is a great place for us to stop. You started to mention some of these infrastructure things you're building up. Is there anything you want to let the audience out there know that you got going on for them to be able to support your movement, in the campaign financing for all of us potential prospective candidates out there?
Yeah. So if there's one thing I would say, check out ofthepeople.us and learn more about the project that we're building. And if you feel inclined, feel free to support us on Patreon, because it's an all volunteer effort. And I think if we are able to get the resources to build this platform, it really could change the fabric of the Congress and encourage more everyday Americans to run for office, not necessarily to make Congress their career, but just to kind of have a voice, all of our voices heard. And so I think that would be amazing. And then, of course, check out the YouTube channel, Nerds for Humanity. Always looking to try and grow that audience, because that then helps us promote other candidates when they're on the channel. And same thing with Hill of Roses. Make sure you like and share this video so more people know about the Hill of Roses network.
Oh, well, thank you so much for including that plug, Tom. And yeah, I think there's a lot of work we can be able to do together. Post-election cycle, we're all focused in on getting these candidates across the finish line, but we got work to do that comes after this election, regardless of who wins in the 2020 presidential election. So, Tom, it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. Thank you so much for stopping by the Hill of Roses.
Thanks, John. Let me just say one more thing about our Unity 2020 topic. I do want to acknowledge that people who supported it did it with absolute best of intentions, who were frustrated with the duopoly. I totally get that. And I support those motives. All I'm saying is, if you look at the energy expended and the return on investment multiplied by the probability of that positive outcome, I think there was an alternate path where we said, hey, let's get RCV pushed for in California, or name your favorite state. And let's all really kind of rally hard to get that done. Yeah. Or let's pick one pro-UBI congressional candidate who's on the edge and is in a flippable district. And let's all freaking unify our efforts around that. That would have been way, in my opinion, way more positive for humanity than trying to win the presidential election in 2020, with only a few months before the general election.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And frankly, I think the Unity 2020 idea created more disunity within the Yang Gang itself.
Yeah.
Any of these other efforts of getting ranked choice voting or supporting our candidates, that I think really created a wedge in the group. It kind of created this wedge where it's like you got the Biden people and the anyone but Biden people at this point. So I agree with you. We should be more considerate of our time usage. And so with that being said, I think we've had a great time today, Tom, getting to talk about how we can build up this movement. Any final words after?
Oh, yeah, I have one more.
Yeah, one more.
I have one more plug.
Yeah.
So I've got a change.org petition to get the Biden campaign to offer Yang a senior cabinet role. And please, if you haven't signed it, go out and look for it and sign it. It's not meant to be like, oh, we get a bunch of people to sign and automatically he gets a cabinet role. But here's the reality. That transition team started work already in April. Yep. They are already putting lists together. Now, in life, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we know what happens to silent Yang Gang from the DNC speaker lineup. And we had to scramble to get our guy there. I don't want to scramble for the cabinet roles. I want him on the short list. I think we all do, from the first round, because we won't be able to drag Yang in, afterwards, he's saying, "Oh, how dare he not get offered?" Like once those offers are made, like that's done. Now is the time. So please consider the Yang cabinet petition on change, and you can I post about it all the time, and hopefully folks can find it.
Yeah, no, I hope everyone will take that effort. It's a 15-second signature on a petition, so we do hope everyone does that. And likewise, continue supporting the congressional candidates. They're going to want Yang in the administration if he has more influence, and he shows more influence by our candidates winning. So I hope everyone keeps getting involved out there. We can't just stay quiet, as you just said, Tom. So thank you for coming on today and being able to speak to the gang out there of how we continue going forward.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure. See you guys next time, Rosebuds.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Hill of Roses. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please let us know by subscribing to our channel, liking today's video, and sharing the video with your friends. Also, if you want to be notified, please make sure you hit the bell when you subscribe. Finally, if you want to find more of our network's content, please go to thehillofroses.com. With that being said, we love y'all for helping the movement grow, and we hope you're staying rosy out there.